If you were to read Ed Burke's official biography, you could go through and underline some important things that would give you a rough outline of an individual. I had called his office last week and said, what does Ed give out when he does his, when he's giving his official biography out? And I got a very kind of concise one-page document, and I underlined some things like 4 decades. That's the first thing. Now, 4 decades is the amount of time that Alderman Ed Burke has represented people in the city of Chicago from the 14th Ward and people throughout the city of Chicago from his various positions of leadership in the council. He is an expert on budget matters, and anyone who knows the work that he's done as the chairman of finance knows that. When I first joined the council in 1983, Ed Burke, I think, is the first and only chairman of the Finance Committee who actually put together an entire city budget to actually compare to the budget that was introduced by the administration at that time. It was a Herculean task, and it was done in a matter of months. He is a master parliamentarian, and anyone who has ever been in a floor fight in the city council trying to make maneuvers and determine how you're going to win from the standpoint of parliamentary procedure, you would always want to have Alderman Burke in your corner giving advice. He is an avid student of Chicago history, and if the topic today doesn't prove that, I don't know what would. He is a co-author of 3 books, and anyone that talks to Ed about the subject matter of the books that he has co-authored or the subjects that he researches, Mrs. O'Leary comes to mind, he can become as animated as you can imagine how much enjoyment he gets from giving you the history of this great city. He's a partner in a law firm, and he is a longtime resident of the Southwest Side. But during the remap recently, we found that Ed had moved 4 or 5 times in the time that he has served the 14th Ward as a result of either remap changes or the result of trying to keep up with the ward that kept moving away from him. And when we were there in late hours this past year and people were complaining about where their ward was, Ed just looked up at one point in time and says, fellas, I've moved 4 or 5 times since I've been here, so I don't know what you're complaining about. And it really put a great perspective and a great calming influence on what we were doing. So if you read the official biography, you would get a sense of a man, but you really would not get a well-rounded picture. If I were to tell you that Alderman Burke plays a mean piano, sings a pretty decent Irish tune or two, is a daily communicant, you would get a better idea of Ed Burke. Like many of us in this room, I think he would love to be a better golfer than he is, but it doesn't stop us from trying. But these types of things are somewhat trivial if you don't realize some of the things that Ed Burke does on a daily basis. For the average person in this city, for the city worker, for the injured fireman or police officer, the compassion that Ed Burke displays, the visitations that he makes when people are wounded or hurt on in the line of duty, the insurance that he puts in to make sure that that individual and their family are taken care of by the city of Chicago for the injuries that they have received as part of their job is incredible. And it is something that we can all be very proud of and wish to emulate. In this club and in this room, I have been here many times and seen some very talented individuals, people who run government, people who have some of the highest levels of position in the city, in the state, in federal government. Sorry, it's the young bloods. But at every level, whether they were a government official or a captain of industry, you've seen some great talented people here. You will see no one with greater talent or a greater affinity for the city of Chicago in this room than the individual that I'm introducing to you. Ed Burke is a true Chicagoan, an avid promoter of this city, and a tremendous co-worker. A few years ago, I would have lauded his Rolodex, but we can't do that anymore, so I guess it's contacts now. I would love to have the contacts in his computer or his phone. But more to the point, he is a man of resource that utilizes those contacts for the betterment of people day in, day out, that the average person in this city never knows, and clearly the media never knows. He is a person that I am proud to work with. I have been proud to learn from him. I am exceptionally happy that we are co-workers in an exciting new administration, and I wish to introduce to you Alderman Ed Burke.
Thank you, Pat. Thank you very much for those very, very kind and generous remarks. I'm delighted to be able to be with all of you this afternoon and to thank Jay and his board for the kind introduction and invitation to be present with you. I've been especially looking forward to the opportunity to speak with you this afternoon as we are quickly approaching a significant date in our city's history. One that I hope will lead us to a deeper understanding of all the forces that created this region as we know it today. August 15th, 2012 will mark the 200th anniversary of an extraordinary event in Chicago, the Battle of Fort Dearborn. The last of the 4 red stars on Chicago's municipal flag was added on December 21st, 1939, to commemorate Fort Dearborn. This demonstrates the importance the event occupies, not only for earlier Chicagoans, but for everyone in our city for years and years to come. It ensures that the memory of what happened will not fade and that Fort Dearborn will remain an important part of the history of this great metropolis. Chicago has transformed beyond all expectations in those past 2 centuries. Yet the frontier vitality which originated in the hearts and the minds of those who decided to build in the remote wilderness near the shores of Lake Michigan has endured. There is no doubt that it has been instrumental in propelling our city from a small military outpost to the capital of the American heartland. More important than commemorating the event itself, however, is the opportunity afforded us to make an attempt to appreciate and understand the lives of those who explored and inhabited the region in a time long before logs were hewn or canals were dug. There is rarely a single distinct version of the past upon which everyone can agree, and that is both a challenge and an appeal to remembering an event like this. Good history is about synthesizing all of the smaller accounts and events and understanding how they come together in the larger view of what the world was like at that time. Our goal for August 15th is not simply to remember, but it is to educate the people of Chicago about the lives and cultures of the people who have helped to create this great city. The establishment of Fort Dearborn was by no means the beginning of the United States' official interest in this trading crossroads of the northwestern frontier. Chicago's history extends far earlier, sharing its past with the once small tribe of the Potawatomi. This historic tribe occupied extensive territory along the eastern and western borders of Lake Michigan, including much of what would become northeastern Illinois. After the Revolutionary War, Americans began to expand westward in larger numbers, leading to conflicts with the native tribes as they were slowly and painfully pushed from their traditional villages and hunting grounds. Though the United States had gained control of the Northwest Territories from the British in the Treaty of Paris in 1783, the situation on the ground was not quite so simple. Great Britain continued to pursue its interests in the continent, refusing to cede control of her forts and dominating the fur trade with Indian tribes. The British sought to keep the natives unified against the United States and encouraged them to resist the constantly growing American demand for territory. After years of struggle involving deadly raids, battles, and thousands of deaths, culminating in the Battle of Fallen Timbers in 1794, native tribes ceded extensive territory to the United States in the Treaty of Greenville in 1795. The treaty opened up the Northwest Territory to American immigration, trade, and commerce, while also granting to the United States 16 strategic tracts of land, which included one piece of land, 6 miles square, at the mouth of the Chicago River, emptying into the southwest end of Lake Michigan, the future site of downtown Chicago. This tract of land continued to be important in Chicago's growth throughout the years. And when the Illinois and Michigan Canal was completed in 1848, the debt was to be paid off through tolls and land sales. Much of the 6 square miles was sold by the federal government and made it possible for the canal to pay off its debt. After the Treaty of Greenville and the Louisiana Purchase, 8 years later, in 1803, the strategic value of this land was clear. The critical link by portage that connected the Great Lakes and Chicago River to the Des Plaines River and thence the Mississippi was becoming more important than ever. The flood of settlers arriving in the region demanded protection, and new outposts had to be constructed to keep pace with the nation's rapidly expanding borders. Secretary of War Henry Dearborn ordered Captain John Whistler and 6 men to survey the area and construct a stockade to guard this important portage route. You may know that this Captain Whistler was an Irish immigrant whose grandson was James Abbott McNeill Whistler, the famous American painter, widely known for his work, Whistler's Mother. The Whistler family artistic skill can even be appreciated in Captain Whistler's drawings of the fort's design. The location of the fort is today the intersection of Michigan Avenue and Wacker Drive. Fort Dearborn became the extreme western outpost of the United States, providing local Potawatomi Indians with ready access to a U.S. trading post. At the same time, protection for waves of future settlers was a national goal. American claims for control over the region were a national priority. The fort that rose up was an impressive structure of military ingenuity. The outpost was complete with 3 cannons, scores of muskets, and at times as many as 96 soldiers. They lived behind 14-foot hewn log walls topped with iron crow's feet, which were in turn surrounded by a lower second fence of saplings, creating a no man's land in between. The tiny fortification was very much a world of its own, far removed from the civilization of the East. The means of communication available to residents of Chicago were limited to late arriving messages and rumors. One can imagine the utter sense of detachment that Captain Whistler and his men must have felt from November to May. The relationship between the occupants of the fort and the Potawatomi were not always agreeable. The clothing, tools, guns, and supplies that could be acquired through the fur trade threatened to disrupt an established way of life that had existed for hundreds of years before the arrival of any American settlers. While some natives appreciated the convenience provided by American goods, many urged a return to a more traditional way of life. As the United States continued to expand and Indian tribes felt cheated by treaties and extensive cessions, tensions grew. Ultimately, Americans and the natives were in competition for the very same land. The fort became, in their eyes, an ugly symbol of American dominance and insatiable appetite for territory. Animosity between the United States and Great Britain finally led to conflict. On June 18, 1812, exactly 200 years ago today, President James Madison signed a declaration of war marking the beginning of the War of 1812. As the nations went to war, Native American people who were continuously displaced by encroaching settlers viewed this as an opportunity to maintain their vanishing way of life. Fort Mackinac in Michigan was captured by the British on July 17th in the first land engagement of the war. When news of the defeat reached General William Hull in Detroit on July 29th, he determined that Fort Dearborn was indefensible, and thus he ordered evacuation with surplus supplies to be given to the Indians. He ordered Captain Nathan Held, the commander of the fort, to march his command to the safety of Fort Wayne. The evacuation order arrived at Fort Dearborn on August 9th, carried by Winnemac, a Potawatomi leader who had maintained good relations with the American military. Warning the fort commander of the increasingly hostile perception of the Americans among neighboring Potawatomi, he advised Captain Held that he should leave immediately to avoid a possible confrontation. Staging a full evacuation of the fort with no preparation was, of course, out of the question, and Captain Held made plans to leave for Fort Wayne in the ensuing days. On August 14th, when all was ready for the departure, Black Partridge, a powerful Potawatomi village leader and longtime United States ally, gave Captain Held yet another warning against abandoning the safety of the fort. He surrendered a friendship medal given to him at the Treaty of Fort Wayne and warned the commander to remain inside the fort. As news of the retreat had spread, hundreds of warriors, women, and children had camped out near the fort in the hopes of receiving a promised share of the stockpiled American goods. At 9 a.m. on the morning of the 15th, 54 soldiers, 12 militiamen, and 27 settlers began the slow march to Fort Wayne through the temporary Indian camps that now surrounded the fort, with the legendary former Army Captain William Wells and 30 Miami Indians serving as an advance guard. Realizing the violence that was about to come, the Miami Indians quickly abandoned the Americans. 2 miles south of the fort, at what today would be 18th and Prairie Avenue, the ambush began. The party from Fort Dearborn was surrounded. The battle lasted only 15 minutes before Captain Held was forced to surrender after being overwhelmed by a superior force estimated at some 500 warriors. After the initial volley of shots, much of the combat was hand-to-hand, using bayonets, tomahawks, and musket butts. 35 soldiers, all 12 members of the militia, 14 settlers, and 15 Potawatomi were killed in what became the first tragedy in Chicago's history. Among the soldiers who died during the battle was Ensign George Ronan, who was the first ever West Point graduate to be killed in the line of duty. Ronan was described by his peers as a man of more than usual spirit and breadth of vision, and this was proven to be true by his conduct in battle. Survivors told of how Ronan died a hero. Despite mortal wounds, he fought on to protect the women and children inside the baggage wagons. Overwhelmed and with no time to reload his weapon, he swung his musket at the attacking warriors before being shot 3 times. As he made a final attempt to rise to continue his fight, a warrior tomahawked him twice. Chicago honored Ensign Ronan's sacrifice by naming a park in his memory. Also killed by the warriors was William Wells, the former Army captain, warrior, and one-time Indian agent from Kentucky. Wells had been kidnapped and adopted into a Miami tribal family at the age of 12, earning widespread respect as a warrior. His expertise in Indian warfare served him well that morning as he shot down enemies from all directions before his horse collapsed underneath him. As he lay pinned by the animal, bleeding heavily in the sand with the last of his ammunition spent, he was shot in the head by approaching warriors. After taking Captain Wells' scalp as a trophy, the warriors cut open his chest in the shape of a cross and pulled out his heart. As the crowd grew larger and louder around the body of the famous frontier scout, they cut up his heart and ate it, thinking to imbibe Captain Wells' courage. He was a hero who gave his life voluntarily in order to save friends and family. Wells Street today commemorates his actions. As the fighting drew the soldiers away from the wagons, it was left to the 12-man militia to defend the baggage carts filled with their wives and children. Every one of the 12 was slain, each using his musket as a club in the final act of desperation against hundreds of masked warriors. With no defender left to protect the women and the children, a single Potawatomi climbed into a wagon filled with the children and bludgeoned 11 to death with his tomahawk. It was said that Mrs. Corbin, the wife of a private soldier, had vowed never to be taken prisoner. Consequently, she fought until she was cut to pieces. Of the 14 civilians slain in the battle, one was Cicely, Rebecca Held's African-American servant who had arrived at the fort in 1811, accompanying the captain's wife. She and her infant son were riding in the wagons with the civilians when the natives burst past Ensign Ronan and the militia guard, killing both. Cicely's death offers one of the few instances in which there are authentic records of persons held in slavery here in Chicago. Outnumbered almost 10 to 1, the group had a choice to fight to the death or surrender and hope for mercy. After receiving promises that the captives would be spared, a badly wounded Captain Held agreed to the surrender. The agreement was quickly ignored. The victorious warriors brought their captives back to the abandoned fort past the horrific scene of slain women, men, and children. That night at the fort, they tortured to death at least 5 of the badly wounded soldiers, possibly burning them at the stake. The next morning, the remaining captives were divided up as the natives prepared to return to their villages, and Fort Dearborn was burned to the ground. Later the next day, Billy Caldwell, the half-Irish Potawatomi, who also went by the name of Sauganash, arrived at the scene. He was trusted by both Indians and soldiers and was often relied on to oversee the operations of John Kinzie's trading business. Caldwell learned upon his arrival that the Kinzie family was in danger. Some 20 Indian warriors who arrived too late for the battle were threatening the mother and children at the Kinzie home. Caldwell, dressed completely as an Indian, along with some friendly natives, persuaded the vengeful band to spare the Kinzie family. Mrs. Kinzie and her family were saved. Billy Caldwell continued to use his skills and his moderate character throughout his life. And years later, he became the first justice of the peace when he was appointed in 1825. The Sauganash neighborhood on our city's far north side, as well as Billy Caldwell Golf Course and Forest Preserve, today bear his name. Most of the surviving prisoners eventually found their way back to civilization either through ransom or escape, though some died in captivity. That was the case of Mrs. Needs, a wife of one of the soldiers. She, her husband, and infant child all survived the battle, only to die painfully in captivity. The husband died as a prisoner in January of 1813, and when the Indians became annoyed with her child's cries from hunger, the baby was tied to a tree and left to die of starvation and exposure. Mrs. Needs herself died soon after, from cold and hunger. When a captive became too weak or injured to travel, the tomahawk was often the solution. The area was sparsely inhabited until 1816, when the United States once again returned to rebuild, reportedly finding the bones of some of the battle's dead still lying unburied on the shore of Lake Michigan. Carrying on the tradition that began with the fort's original occupants, soldiers, traders, and settlers brought to the area a determination to carve out a new life. Through the bravery, the strength, the cooperation of Chicago's earliest settlers, the fort area was reclaimed and a city was born. It is the same pioneering spirit, is it not, that even today continues to make Chicago the city of big shoulders and the most American of American cities. Commemorating the 200th anniversary of the Battle of Fort Dearborn on August 15th allows us the opportunity to appreciate the historical significance of this event for both Chicago and the nation. But more importantly, it provides the chance to understand the causes of the tragedy. Indeed, it is not an occasion for blame or for vengeance or for anger, but one to foster a sense of mutual respect and admiration for all those who met their fates here, where the prairie meets the lake. Since many of the dead never received proper burial or acknowledgement of their sacrifice, it also offers us a chance to remember that they gave a full measure. A day of remembrance and reconciliation on August 15th will achieve this goal. We hope to encourage curiosity in the lives of Chicago's founders. It will permit us to celebrate those who died, those who lived, and the adversity which provided Chicago the strength to grow. Thank you so much for your kind attention, and may God bless America. In case none of you caught the photo yesterday, there's me giving President Obama some advice on his swing at Beverly. Before I entertain questions, I'd just like to make one brief acknowledgement. I would like to acknowledge a true Chicago legend, Bishop Tim Line, who's at table 26. Would you join me in acknowledging Bishop Line?
Well, Ed, we'll have a lot of questions, I'm sure. Thank you for putting us all in such a happy mood. Okay. Well, this is pretty appropriate, Ed. Kent Griffiths from Wolf Point Strategies. Billy Caldwell used to hang out there. Since when is a 500 to 100 ambush defined as a battle and not a massacre? Isn't this Orwellian? Welcome to the City Club.
As I tried to say in my remarks, I don't think this is a time for anger or vindictiveness or vengeance. The facts are what they are, but I think we need to move on and look forward, not back. The Boston Massacre found just 5 civilians slain by British soldiers. But I, for one, am encouraged that the use of words can inflame people, and if abandoning the word massacre can make us more open and agreeable to reconciliation, I think that serves a good purpose.
And to that point, we have the British Consul General here, sitting in the back of the room. There you go, Robert. I believe that door does open. Okay. Will there be an official ceremony, Alden, on the 15th?
Hopefully, we're working with some of the various groups who are interested in commemorating the event, and the local community groups, as a matter of fact, have really taken an interest in this. And if any of you drive out to 18th and Prairie, you'll see a plaque that commemorates the site. My colleague, Alderman Bob Fioretti, was very active in making sure that that site would be noted and commemorated.
Okay, since we don't have too many historians in the room, how about a big round of applause for our speaker? Everybody got some...